So a little bit about me. I started my career in UX actually as a UX designer. This is back when UX and UI were more distinct disciplines. Do we have any designers in the room? Show of hands. Yes, okay, a couple. Any mixed designers and researchers? Okay, nice. So I later transitioned to be fully research, which is really where my true passion has always been. I studied psychology, love to understand more about human behavior and people. Most of my experience has been on the agency and the consultancy side, which is really very different than being an in-house researcher, which we'll get into. But here are some of the companies I've worked with. So really a vast array of industries from insurance to e-commerce, meaning I've spoken to a lot of different types of users in my time so far. So I joined Etsy as a senior researcher in 2020. And as Katie said, now I lead a team focused on the seller experience. Before we go any further, I'd like to just say a quick disclaimer that while I work at Etsy, what I'm going to share are my personal views, not the views of Etsy, legally required to say that. But let me give you more context on how we structure research at Etsy. We have teams focused on two main user types. So one is the seller, which we'll be chatting about today, and the other are our buyers, which hopefully many of you are buyers. Our company mission is what you see here, to keep commerce human. And at the heart of that are our sellers and their unique human touch that makes Etsy, Etsy. So what you're seeing here are mock-ups from our new ad campaign, and it celebrates the human connection and creativity that comes to life every day, highlighting our sellers at the forefront. We have about 9 million sellers globally, and as you can imagine, that means that there is an extremely broad range of user needs, assumptions, behaviors, and so on. I know typically we think of creators as social media influencers, content creators, but the creator economy also more broadly includes people selling their craft on Etsy. We also know that some of them are actually social media influencers and content creators as well, so they use that as a platform to drive traffic to their Etsy shops. So here's what I'm going to cover today. What is the power dynamic? How is it created? What are the implications on us as researchers? And what are some tactics that you can take away for how to dismantle? I'm going to start with a poll. How many of you have purchased something on Etsy from the last couple of years or so? Oh, wow, a fair amount. Okay, great. Has anyone noticed this little purple star icon? Oh, I'm seeing a couple nods. That's great. By the way, for those that didn't raise your hand, as a researcher, I'd love to talk to you after this. So come find me. I have some buyer researchers on here as well, so I'd love to talk to you about this. Well, I asked because this was actually a project that I worked on when I first joined Etsy. Shortly after I joined, I worked on a team, and by the way, this label is called Star Seller. That's what this denotes. So I worked on that team working on this concept, and the idea was that we would create a program to provide sellers with customer service minimum requirements. And if they hit those requirements, then they get this label on their listing or on their shop. This was a sensitive topic. It was the first time that we were really transparent with sellers about actions that they could do to get them more notice to buyers. And so I'm gonna share some representative feedback from the initial research that I did. Overall, I like it. It's motivating. I think it's a positive thing. It's a way to push you to tell you what matters. Seems like Etsy is rewarding sellers, which I appreciate. It's not so bad, right? It sounds pretty good. Sellers seem into the program concept, and we heard positive feedback in session. Leo seems to love it. Fast forward to after we launched. It's unrealistic and it's unattainable to most sellers. I can't believe you're asking this of us. It's adding all this additional stress. What's even the benefit? I don't feel like buyers care about this. This is what I looked like after we launched the program. Now, I know what you're all thinking as researchers. That can be said for any study, right? Don't rely on what your users tell you. That's Research 101. But that said, This was a theme that I started noticing more and more than in any other research organization I've worked in, and it really presents a major challenge when you lean on user feedback to inform your product. This brings me to the topic of power dynamics. I chose this visual because I thought it was a great way to represent the delicate balance of power through this scale. By the way, if anyone's been looking for a lamp that doubles as a scale, this is a real Etsy listing. It could be yours for a steal. The challenge is that in a study, particularly with creators on one end, or in our case, sellers, and the marketplace on the other, that's all of you, I'd say it's generally tipped toward the researcher. So how does this power dynamic get created? Well, according to psychologists French and Raven, there are 7 different ways that power is created. I'm going to focus on the 3 that I think are most relevant in creator research. The first is through reward. So this type of power involves holding power to reward certain behavior, positively and negatively. This can manifest, in our case, as sellers thinking you may be able to pull down some strings, help them get their shop higher in search rankings, and so on. But the converse of that is true as well. Sellers might think you, as a researcher, might be able to punish their shops in some way and negatively hurt their experience on Etsy. Then we have expert power. So when you're an expert in a specific field, you wield a certain amount of power as not many people have that same level of knowledge or experience. That's very closely related to informational. Informational power means that a person has access to certain information that gives them status or makes them valuable or desirable. So participants really view you as being the expert on all the things. We see this all the time. Sellers think we have some insider tips or tricks to conversion. We can tell them what buyers want. You can give them tips for how to get higher in search ranking, and that we hold all of this information that can help out their shops. So the implications of this are true of all research. I think it's clear to all of us as researchers why this is a challenge and important, but I think in creator research, it's really magnified. But why is that? Sure, many of you have heard of this phrase. In essence, it's really saying, don't piss off the people that help you, especially those that have any part in your livelihood. By the way, this is a hand pillow for anyone looking for a custom handmade pillow. This could be yours for a steal. It's a steal. Custom made. Local seller in Brooklyn. Kim Pokes is the shop. But before we get any further, it's important to understand the context of sellers at Etsy. So as I mentioned earlier, we have about 9 million. And as you can imagine, the diversity of those sellers are vast. So one way to look at it is through the spectrum. On the one end, we have what we refer to as hobbyists. So these are perhaps sellers who took up crocheting as a hobby. Maybe they're a retiree. They started a shop for fun because their family suggested it was something that they should do. On the other end, you have mega sellers. So these are, shops that are really raking it in. They have maybe teams of employees helping them to run their shop. But why is this important to understand when we're talking about power dynamics? Because generally speaking, as you move from the left side of the spectrum over to the right, the sellers are more likelier to rely on Etsy as their primary source of income. Here are some other trends that I've noticed in my time. Now, none of these are hard and fast rules, and of course, there are exceptions. What kind of researcher would I be if I didn't say it depends at least once in a conversation? New sellers, they're hopeful. They're wide-eyed, they want to make nice with Etsy, they want to get on our good side. We have tenured sellers, they've been around the block, they've been with Etsy through many changes, both good and bad, and they're pretty vocal about it. And then we have those mega sellers. As we said before, this is where they start to become more reliant on Etsy for their income. And that means they're likelier to be more fearful of any change or anything that might impact their success. So what does this mean? So this means that Etsy's sellers see us in a variety of different ways, depending on their specific viewpoint, depending on how you slice and dice them. They might see you as their boss. This is something that we might see with newer sellers who are new to the platform, and they view Etsy in this manner. They might see Etsy as someone that controls their success. Really, this is a commonly held perception across all sellers. Some sellers, particularly tenured sellers, might view Etsy as someone, as a nuisance, interferes with my business, telling me what to do. I'm just trying to make my craft and sell my shop and sell my items. And someone that holds their income. So this is especially sensitive, like we said, to mega sellers who really primarily rely on Etsy as their primary source of income. And then a hobbyist might view Etsy as someone that just brings me buyers. I'm just doing this for fun, not a lot of skin in the game. So what does this mean for you as a researcher, or for me as a researcher at Etsy? Well, it means that they also view you in that same way. When you're doing sessions with them, this is how they see you, as their boss, as someone that controls their success. And that really adds to this concept of a power dynamic in sessions. So this might lead to participants that are overly enthusiastic. We saw this with the star seller example. Participants love the idea in concept testing. Someone even said that they thought it was Etsy's way of rewarding them. This might happen particularly to new sellers or hobbyists. They're trying to get on Etsy's good side, make nice with us. We also see that this can lead to participants that are fearful of being too candid. If a seller views this as someone who controls their success, like mega sellers do, then it makes sense that they might be more hesitant to share something that we might be able to use against, or they think that Etsy might be able to use against them. So they might not want to say anything to piss off their boss. Lastly, you might see participants who are focused on providing the right answer. We see this with new sellers, particularly in task-based usability tests, and something you really want to be cognizant of because you want feedback that will mimic real life, not someone trying to get the correct answer. All of this is problematic. So what can we do about it? How can you tip the scale back towards the participant? So I'll preface this section by saying that what I'm going to share are going to be really just good reminders of foundational things that are easy to overlook in practice, but are especially important as creator-side researchers. We all need to acknowledge that we're in a unique position of representing organizations that directly impact the livelihoods of these creators. And as such, we need to be extra cognizant of what we can do to dismantle this power dynamic that's just inherent in the sessions that we do. I'm going to go through 4 key tactics today. So the first is to know your users and to recruit accordingly. Some helpful prompts to consider: how might this segment view our organization? How reliant are they on our organization as their primary source of income? What's their tenure, and what have they experienced during that tenure that might influence how they view us? The second is to build rapport and trust, which I know we all know as researchers, but truly this is the foundation that enables participants to feel comfortable sharing their honest thoughts, behaviors, and so on. This is much easier to do for me when I was a consultant because I didn't have to work as hard to let them know, hey, I'm just an impartial third party. So what can you do as those of you who are in-house researchers? Remind folks that you're human. This reminds me of our company mission. Break the ice, start with an intro about yourself, and relate to something that they're sharing in a session. Hey, I've been looking for the perfect hand pillow for my couch for weeks. Disassociating yourself from your organization and from the product team and whatever greater team that you belong to. Oh, I know Etsy is the worst. No, but in all seriousness, hey, I'm just a researcher. I'm on the research team. I didn't design this concept. If you have anything critical to share, I won't be offended, and there's no hard feelings. This one will go a long way with tenured sellers who have a history with us. The last is to make room for venting to an extent. For many participants, this might be the first time they've had any interaction with anyone from your organization. So let them release any built up frustration, share about the time that they felt wronged by a buyer. I have had so many sellers be upset over low reviews from buyers. By the way, they're pretty sensitive about that. Just let them vent. I understand you didn't deserve that 1-star review. I agree. That was probably like a 3-star review. We also saw this happen a lot in spring of 2022. So that was right after we increased our transaction fees, and sellers were not shy about telling us how they felt about that increase. It's okay to empathize and acknowledge their feelings. And this is really where the other 2 tactics of connecting human to human, disassociating yourself, goes a long way to helping them feel comfortable in making room for sharing their true feelings. This next one is to test in low to medium fidelity. So this is one I actually feel very strongly about, and I think that for the most part, we should all be doing this as a best practice. Back when I was a UX designer, this is about 10 years ago, we almost always exclusively tested in low to medium fidelity wireframes. And typically, it would have gone through many iterations before a UI designer even came in and added all of the fun stuff. When you test in low fidelity, it's clearer to users that we're just exploring. We haven't put a lot of time into it yet. And so they're just more open with their feedback. They know that this is just concept-y, and they're not as precious about sharing any critical feedback. The bonus tip is that this is an internal win too, so that your teams don't get too attached to a single direction. Well, I'm looking at you designers, and leading them to be more receptive of critical feedback. I'm allowed to say that I was a designer. So when we got further along, this is an example from Star Seller. We wanted to test different ways of showing users the data that we were going to present to them. I insisted that we do all of that in low fidelity because I wanted the seller to focus on the metric itself and what it might mean to have that data. I even took it out of the context of our tools and I shared it on a blank screen, and that's all they focused on. I knew that having the design in higher fidelity, nestled within our navigation of Shop Manager, making it look more real, it would lead sellers to panic and think that this was something that was close to being released. They would focus on that. And so I wanted to just remove all of that fear and just have them focus on the content. When all else fails, people watch. We all know that actions speak louder than words, but really observing behavior goes a long way. So explore other methodologies like contextual inquiries, unmoderated studies, session replays. So there's software like Full Story that can show you what users are doing, and lean into what user actions are telling us. And experiment. So just remove the researcher completely. But in all seriousness, experimentation is an excellent way to learn because it gets at the underlying behavior that users can't articulate well. So if your organization has this capability, take advantage of this powerful tool and advocate for it with your stakeholders. So bringing it back to Star Seller, while the initial feedback after launch wasn't the greatest, we found through data and observation that sellers were actually taking the recommendations that we were asking them to do. Why would they be doing that? They hated it. Well, this to me says that the recommendations and the way we display the data was clear in the product, and we probably have some room to go with the positioning and marketing of the program. Thank you.